Dr. E.N.G. Marek Gruszecki. Philosophy of Being. Krakow, 2025. My 85th anniversary. Philosophical essay Does God Exist? Krakow, the 19th of April 2025.
John Paul II, Part 1. In 1978, the conclave elected Cardinal Karol Wojtyla, the 264th head of the Catholic Church, as Pope. In 1979, the Pope made his first trip to Poland. During Mass in Warsaw, John Paul II uttered some of the most famous words of the pontificate. May your spirit descend and renew the face of the earth. This earth. During his 8th pilgrimage to Poland in 2002, the culminating moment was a Mass at Krakow's Błony Park, where some 2.5 million pilgrims gathered. In 2005, John Paul II died, and his last recorded words were, "Let me go to the Father's house." The Vatican presented its official position on the so-called case of Galileo Galilei, the astronomer condemned by the Inquisition Tribunal in 1633. John Paul II acknowledged that the Church had made a mistake in condemning the Italian scientist. The Galileo case was a key moment when the paths of science and the Church diverged. As an astronomical authority, Galileo began to campaign for Copernicus. For John Paul II, closing the Galileo case was one of the key issues from the beginning of his pontificate. The Pope set up a special research commission. He was well aware that in the eyes of the world it was the Church, not Galileo, that needed rehabilitation. After 11 years, the commission came to an end. Agreement between science and faith was what John Paul II expected. In 1986, representatives of various Christian denominations and world religions came to Assisi, the city of St. Francis, at the invitation of John Paul II. John Paul II's invitation was accepted by 47 delegations representing 13 world religions. They were united by a common goal, the desire for peace. However, this was not the only reason for the Pope's turn in this direction. The motto of the meeting was being together to pray. The problem of the Inquisition is linked to a turbulent period in the history of the Church, which Christians should reflect on in sincerity of heart. The request for forgiveness is to be concerned first and foremost with practical fidelity to the preached principles in the life of the Church. The commission set up felt that it could not properly reflect on the phenomenon of the Inquisition until it had listened to the opinions of specialists in historical sciences. At a time when socio-political currents such as liberation theology were developing with tremendous force in the Church, John Paul II, in his first encyclical, presented a genuine program of human liberation that begins with the human heart and not with the implementation of liberal sociological demands. The experience of the Church in Poland for John Paul II gave the right perspective from both the theological and pastoral side, as well as the social side. John Paul II, Part 2. The Pope held frequent meetings with scientists and people of culture. He continued the same, but on a much wider scale, when he was elected Pope, hence the famous meetings at Castel Gandolfo. These meetings emphatically demonstrate John Paul II's openness to various currents in contemporary science and culture. John Paul II showed a keen political instinct, e.g. he regarded the election of General Wojciech Jaruzelski as president of the Polish People's Republic as a necessary guarantee for the implementation of the Round Table. Pope consistently reminded Poles that they were part of Europe and Europeans that the European community did not end at the Elbe. Without his inspiration, it is difficult to imagine the peaceful fall of the Iron Curtain and such a rapid subsequent integration process. John Paul II can be counted among the founding fathers of a united Europe, not in the institutional sense, but in the spiritual sense. John Paul II's road to sainthood began under social pressure, or rather the demand for santo subito. This phrase refers to the Christian tradition. Experts in canon law claim that there are no doctrinal impediments to the extraordinary shortening of the lengthy trials applied to date. The Pope has announced that he sees no obstacle to the beatification process of John Paul II starting immediately. In 2011, the beatification of John Paul II took place in a solemn Mass in St. Peter's Square in Rome. The canonization process was initiated by the Pope, who issued a decree on the miracle. Pope Francis celebrated the canonization Mass in St. Peter's Square. Some Catholics are questioning the validity of the beatification. Both the veracity of the miracle and whether it should be attributed to John Paul II are being questioned. The haste of the beatification in light of the sexual abuse scandal in the Catholic Church has also been criticized. John Paul II was accused of failing to recognize the significance of sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. A Swiss critic of the Catholic Church assessed that John Paul II pontificate was full of contradictions and therefore should not be set as a model for the faithful, because what he preached externally was in complete contradiction with his internal politics. In the Church, he exercised an authoritarian teaching function, suppressed the rights of women and theologians. For many who were sexually abused as girls and boys during John Paul II pontificate, this beatification is salt for their still deep and fresh wounds. It would seem that the Holy Father has already said everything in his teaching. The Pope's suffering has proved to be the most beautiful text, which does not need to be explained to anyone.
Conclusion. But Jesus, overhearing what was being said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not be afraid, only believe." Bible, Mark 5 verse 36. It will still be beautiful, despite everything. Just put on comfortable shoes, because you have your whole life to go through. John Paul II. Mathematics in Nature.